Today, we have a guest who is on a mission to help others and prioritize their number one relationship. He just released a new book called Kickass Husband, and it's a handbook for imperfect husbands who want to invest in and fortify their number one relationship. Please welcome Matthew Hoffman. Hey there!
Hey, Jillian, how are you?
I'm good. I'm so glad you're here. I'm so excited to talk to you because I feel like so many people are going to benefit from this conversation because we as entrepreneurs, sometimes we drag our spouses along with us, kicking and screaming. And I'm excited that your book is out there to really help people make sure that our relationship is number one. So tell me, what helped you decide to write this book?
So it's interesting. I had the idea for a book for a little while, and it was kind of that hobby that sat on the shelf with just a lot of ideas. And I'm part of an accountability group that we call Kaizen, which is the Japanese word for continuous improvement. And we meet once a month for half a day, 5 men, and we're committed to each other, high level of trust, high level of confidentiality. And we talk to each other about our businesses, about our family lives, our personal lives, and we lay it all out there. And it's accountability to make sure that we're doing everything we can to be most successful in every area of our life. And I would talk about my family and my wife and what I'm doing, and they would say, Matt, no guy knows how to do what you do. You ought to write a book. And then when your friends say you ought to write a book, you go, yeah, that's your dream. Thank you, not mine. And after I heard it long enough, I started to take it a little bit more seriously. And then I had a career change that gave me the opportunity to free up the time to really focus on it. And so that's what launched me into the book writing scene.
That's awesome. And I'm so glad that you did because relationships are number one. And I think sometimes when we get into our business, we get laser focused on creating it, that sometimes there's other things that fall by the wayside. So, what would you say, like, our relationships with our spouses, what's the impact, our careers and our professional work can have on those relationships?
Sure. Well, I think it's a two-way street. And I think that we have a term in our podcast, the Kick-Ass Couples podcast. We talk about spillover thinking. And we say, how does the success of your number one human relationship spill over to other areas of your life? And, my number one job and my wife's number one job is for us to pour into each other so much that there's so much good, we can't contain it. So if my wife is pouring into me and loving me and supporting me and doing all the things that she can do to help be the best partner in my life, all that good's going to come out. It's going to come out in my relationship with my kids, with everybody I do business with my community, my church. So, and people are going to look and go, man, how come you're so happy? How come you're so fulfilled? And she and I are doing that for each other. So it definitely, I think, your number one relationship is your spouse or your partner. And I think that informs the success in the rest of your life. So if you want to be that ultimate successful entrepreneur, you've got to learn to prioritize your number one relationship, which is not your business, not your parents, not your kids, but it really is your spouse or your partner in life. And if that's number one, you're going to be fulfilled and supported so you can go out and be successful as a business person or whatever you're doing.
And what do you think? I know that you talk a lot about this on your podcast, and your spouse is on your podcast with you, which I think is so cool because you get to see both perspectives, both sides of it. But what are some easy, like simple things that people could do today to pour into their spouse to improve those relationships?
Sure. Well, I'll give you a cheat sheet. You can buy the book, and I have 52 short chapters of Kick-Ass Husband. And it's not just for husbands, it's for wives as well. But, if you look, we have 13 pillars in our brand, and we've kind of narrowed down the top three we call the 3 C's. And those 3 C's are commitment, communication, and conflict resolution. And my co author Chris Cambis said when a couple comes to see him in counseling, and not that there could be anything wrong, but they want to get better or stronger, if the commitment isn't there, he will not take them on as clients because he said, you're wasting my time, and your money. So one great thing you can do for commitment, which I think is the cornerstone of the 3 C's, is you want to take action. Words are great and words are important, but they're pretty meaningless if they're not backed up with specific action. So what I could do for my spouse is to say, what's the one small thing that I can do, my action, that's going to impact her in a positive way? Right. So you do the 5 W's, the who, what, when, where, why, and you can't just pick something because if it's not helpful to them, it's not helpful, right? So you can't just read their mind, but talk to them and say, hey, and a good example I would say, Jillian, is like, what's the one household chore that you hate the most? The thing that you hate that has to be done in our home that you just don't like to do. And my wife may say, I hate unloading the dishwasher.
I was
So I
just going
say,
to say that.
so because my wife, she's got a little type A. If she knows there's clean dishes in there, she won't go to bed because you're like, I got to put them away. So that might be something for her. But if I agree to take that on whenever I can, then it relieves her of something that she doesn't like to do. And she goes, man, my husband is doing something that he knows I hate in an effort to show commitment and to show support of me. It's a very small thing, but if I do that habitually, my action will say to her, he's committed to me because he's willing to do something that he may not even like to do joyfully, and it's having an impact on me because I don't have to do it. So you got to start small. And, Benjamin Franklin said, many strokes fell great oak. So it's not one thing that's a silver bullet, right? It's a lot of little things that added together make your body a work as a partner in a relationship.
What do you think the best way is to empower one another? Because I love that, taking something off of the other's plate that maybe they're not super happy doing. What's the best way to empower one another within our relationships so that we can do our best work?
That's a great question. And so I would say what one of the biggest predictors of divorce, and would you believe it, that 90% of the people in our country, in North America, right, are married after the age 50, 90%. So a lot of people are married. And the next scary statistic is 50% will become divorced. So you got a 50-50 chance of that relationship working. So, and one of the number one predictors of divorce is somebody's not willing to accept influence from their spouse. So what that means is, you hear empathy and empathic thinking, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, Jillian, if I'm willing to value my spouse's opinions and beliefs at the same level that I value my own, right? I'm understanding where she's coming from and how she feels. And understanding is the issue that allows me to best support her to be successful. Doesn't mean agreeing with her. Doesn't mean if she's got an issue, it becomes my issue. It means me understanding I know how she feels and I see what impact this is having on her. And now that I understand that, I'm going to ask and figure out how I can best support her. So if I want her to be successful and pursue her dreams and whatever it is that she's doing or is trying to achieve, I've got to value her opinions like my own. And that means that I'm respecting and loving her unconditionally and not saying, oh, you can't feel that way. Get over it. That's not a big deal. I'm not minimizing her and being critical of her, but I'm supporting her and coming underneath her, behind her, next to her and saying, wow, I get where you are and how tough that is. What's the best way for me to support? And sometimes it's doing nothing. Sometimes it's saying nothing. Sometimes it's just the gentle hand on the shoulder and saying, hey, whenever you need me, I'm here. Let me know what I can do. So I think if we want to be most successful in the relationship and give them the wings, it's really valuing their feelings and opinions as highly as we value our own.
I love that. Tell me some other, like, do you have favorites from your book? I know you have a ton of awesome stuff in there, but are there some others where you're like, this is a golden nugget that I would recommend to anybody today?
Yeah, there's a couple, sure. And one I would say is, we talked about kind of unloading the dishwasher. I would encourage every man or woman to find one thing that they could do for their spouse every day. Just one thing. And it can be so small. And what I do for my wife every day is I make and get her first cup of coffee. Right. I'm usually up before her. I'm an early riser. I'm having my prayer and meditation, study time, my coffee, my reading, my journaling. And then when she's up, I'm ready because I want to greet her. And I'll tell you about that in a minute. But I give her first cup of coffee because it's a small act of service that says, and every time I do that, whether she's getting ready at the dressing table, whether she's running out the door, or whether she comes out in her robe and she's going to have her prayer and study time as well. So what's one daily act of service? And I talk about that in the book that you can do for your spouse that says, I love you. I got your back. Is it packing a lunch, making a coffee? Maybe it's a household chore. Maybe it's a love note taped to the mirror. So that one daily act of service is one thing I would say. Another one, and is a chapter in the book too, is called Stand and Deliver. So every time my spouse enters the room, whether I don't care if I'm on the phone, if I'm texting, if I'm studying, whatever it is, I rise, I recognize her, and I give her a hug and a kiss. So if I'm coming in the home after being gone, if she's coming up from just getting up in the morning or coming down the stairs, I rise in recognition that, hey, I see you. You're here. You're important to me. And I embrace her and give her a kiss. And it's usually a 7-second kiss, because if you hold a kiss for 7 seconds, Jillian, it becomes pretty magical and you can't help but feel it and appreciate it more.
Well, and isn't there something to be said too, like for hugging people? Like there's a certain amount of time that if you hug someone, that there's something like some sort of like response to that. I've heard that somewhere.
Oh, physiological, sure. I mean, you have some people are touchy feely and some are not. And with your spouse, obviously, physical touch is a great way or a door into intimacy. And when you think about intimacy, one of the people we interviewed, the Rogers couple, they've been married for 40 some odd years. And he says, I like to define intimacy as into me, you see. Right. So when you're really being intimate or having that embrace, as you talk about, you
Mhm.
can't help but feel closer because you're physically close. And if there's love and tenderness behind that, that can melt a lot of tension or just recharge a battery or reinforce that feeling. I'm here. I love you. Might be smiling. It might be crying. It might be just happy. I'm so glad you're here. Right. But no, you're right. And physical touch is a huge importance in relationships.
Well, and I know that you share a lot of advice weekly on your podcast. And so, tell me a little bit more about that because I think that this could be something that could really help a lot of people. And being able to, hear that every week about these different tips and tricks that you can, do to make your life better with your spouse. I'd love to hear more about what you cover on the podcast.
Sure. And it's the format is very similar. So we interview all kinds of couples from all kinds of backgrounds, ages. We even have talked to a young couple that they're not married yet. And I think they're probably on the road there, but they're definitely kick ass because they get it. And I think one of the things we always do on the podcast is we say we're going to go back to go forward because we're all products of our environment and of your family of origin, right? We saw love expressed and demonstrated or not, depending on our situation with two parents, one parent, grandparents, siblings, whatever situation it was. And that formed our opinion of what love does or should look like. So think about two people coming together with all these varied backgrounds and histories. If a couple wants to get closer, sometimes people have those marriage intensives and workshops before they get married or once they're married. You've really got to understand what love looked like for them growing up, because it's going to tell you how they like to be loved and how they don't like to be loved. Because and if you can have that conversation before marriage commitment or when you're early on dating, it's going to let you know what this person needs and what they don't need. One of the couples we interviewed, Trish and Vinny Biondelletti, they got married at 19 and 18. And within the first year, they were pregnant with their first child.
Wow.
Trisha grew up in a really abusive situation. She had brothers, and her father died very young, and the stepfather was just pretty brutal to her. So, yelling and screaming and criticism, she came out of an environment that was not loving from a father. So Vinny knew that and got up under her and said, you know what? There's not going to be any yelling. Right. And come on into my family where we're loving and tender. And he took her in. So he knows that those are hot buttons or what we call landmines. So if you know something's a landmine for your spouse, your partner, why would you step on it so it explodes in the relationship? So understanding the history and having the opportunity to ask those questions and do some love mapping. So you understand what you each came to the relationship with, and then what can you do to go forward to build it the most strong to stand the test of time.
That's awesome. And so, again, that podcast happens every week. So, definitely check out. I'll be sure to link it in the show notes so everybody has quick access to it. Now, one question that I love to ask all my guests is what's one piece of advice that you would give a small business owner?
I would say, everybody banters about the work-life balance. And you know what? We're all going to have seasons, in starting this platform and writing the book, there's a season where you're working crazy hours and late hours. It's not a smooth level line that just, as you can relate, Jillian, in business, when you're trying to give birth to something, whether it's a child, a relationship, a new business, you're going to have those peaks and valleys. And I think as an entrepreneur, I think you've got to include your spouse in the decisions that you're making, so they know what you're doing and there's no mystery, and you want to be open and honest, but B, more importantly, so you can have their support, right? Whether it's mentally, physically, prayerfully, whatever it is that you need. If they know what you're doing and you're communicating, that's our communication is our second pillar. If you don't have strong communication with your spouse, especially about business, then that can really build some walls and damage the relationship, but also make it more difficult for you to be successful in your own business. So I think that open communication is critical, so that they don't have to be a partner in your business, so to speak, but they're your life partner. And so they need to know and be apprised of and be part of the journey that you're going on in that business. That's probably the biggest piece of advice is, there's nothing my wife doesn't know or I don't share. I don't get into every minute detail, but I share the ups and downs, the challenges. And if I'm struggling with something, I'll bring her in and say, hey, what do you think about this? This is what I was thinking. And so, because we spend so much time in a business. And if you work outside the home or even if inside the home, you got to be really careful that you're not giving your spouse your leftovers. Because if you're an entrepreneur and, oh my gosh, I'm a one man or one woman show, you can't be so tired and giving all your resources to strangers and contractors that you come back and you just have leftovers for your spouse, because that's not going to keep that number one relationship solid, which really is going to support you and help make you successful in whatever your endeavor is.
Oh my gosh, I couldn't agree more with that, because you're right. You don't want to give leftovers to your spouse. That's not fair to them.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so good. So tell me, where can people find out more about you? Where they can work with you? Where can they find your book? Because it's so good. People definitely need to check it out.
Thank you. Well, Kickass Husband, Winning at Life, Marriage, and Sex is available on Amazon. That's probably the easiest place to get it, whether you want one copy or 10. And you can also visit MatthewPHoffman.com, my website, where we have the book. You can get links to the podcast. And we do audio and video for the podcast. You can listen on any platform you want to listen to the Kickass Couples podcast, or go to YouTube if you want to watch or link from our website. And then Kickass Couples Nation is there, which is our membership site that helps all imperfect couples that want to level up their number one relationship.
That's awesome. And like I mentioned before, I'll be sure to link those in the show notes so people have a handy, quick reference to check those out. Thank you again so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to spend with me. There's so much great stuff that we talked about, and I cannot wait for people to work with you and find out more information in your book, because it's so good. It's so good. Thank you
Oh,
so much.
my pleasure, Jillian. Thanks for having me on. Look forward to talking to you again soon.